Dan Morgan is the GM for the Carolina Panthers. That was released, leaked, announced, reported with about 2.5 minutes left in the show, or before 6 o'clock yesterday, which, was less ideal for our show planning, but it did kind of give us a full night's sleep before we addressed it live on the air here, which is sometimes nice.
Yeah.
Right? Sometimes it's nice to think about it. And I haven't, if you watched any of our social media videos or anything that we did put out last night, I haven't changed my overall feeling. I still would have liked to have seen a different hire here. But the thing that a night's sleep did allow me to kind of come to grips with is I want to emphasize that I am still rooting for Dan Morgan. Right? I am rooting for him to be the perfect hire for the Panthers, even if I don't think he is. Even if I think he misses the mark on so much that I was hoping for the hire. He still seems like a likable guy. He still is a legend from his playing days with the Panthers, and this is how NFL owners hold fans hostage in some ways. If you own a team, the team's fans have no choice but to hope you are right in every decision. Right? If you're a Panthers fan, guess what? You have no choice, but if you want your team to be good, if you want the roster to improve, you have to root for Dan Morgan. Even the decisions, even the hires that you don't necessarily agree with or think are the right hire, you still have no choice but to root for him. So I'm rooting for Dan Morgan. With that being said, he was a part of the group that assembled the current roster, which is the worst roster in the NFL. He was a part of the group, and it's weird to assume that he didn't have any say. Right? It's weird to assume that Scott Fitterer was completely ignoring Dan Morgan as he made the decisions that led the Panthers to 2023 when they were the worst team in the NFL by leaps and bounds.
And Scott Fitterer, when he was in Seattle, Dan Morgan worked with Scott Fitterer, so you think you're not going to – if you're going to bring in Dan Morgan, you expect to have his input involved in this. I'm sure Scott Fitterer didn't bring him on just to be just stand over there in the corner.
Just, hey, you're from Carolina, right? Fill an office for us.
Yeah, hey,
we played there, didn't you?
We used to work together in Seattle.
And then even more so that they named him the GM, right? I think it's very difficult to believe that he went from a completely ignored voice to, I want to hire you to run the whole deal. So that is one section of it, right? I don't think that he is completely immune from criticisms for where the roster stands right now. He's a part of that group, which is not a glowing mark on your resume. What I will say is Sportsology, who is the firm that David Tepper hired to help run the GM and coaching search, their number one accomplishment is putting together what the setup is in San Francisco. Shanahan and John Lynch. And you could see Sportsology helping the Panthers recreate that, right? What is John Lynch? He's a former crowd favorite defensive player. Dan Morgan, former crowd favorite defensive player, being the GM, and they're going to look to pair them with a coach that makes sense and try to build in the same way. But that to me isn't enough to justify Dan Morgan. You're telling me if that's the archetype you're looking for, you couldn't find a former defensive player who knows the game from anywhere outside of the building? The only one was down the hall? Part of this was a refresh. Let's say you give Dan Morgan, hey, I really like him and I don't think he had anything to do with where the roster is at right now. You're telling me you honestly believe if his first draft is a problem, if his first draft doesn't bring in any starters, if his first draft is littered with more DJ Johnsons and Terrace Marshall Jr.'s, if you think his first draft goes that way, you're going to go strike one? Rather than, that's like strike 9. How do we still have this guy here? He's not starting on square one, whether you want him to or not. It's unfair to Dan Morgan in a lot of ways. The first chance he gets to run a team probably should have been somewhere where he's not starting with strikes on him already. He's not stepping into the batter's box with all of us going, I don't know, I'm skeptical, because that's where it is right now. And if you think now suddenly because the relentless pursuit and he's passionate and you play the highlights from his playing career, which I love. I mean, that's the era of football that I grew up in, right? That's what the hard hits, the physicality, the intensity, that's what I'm all about. You play the highlights and you go, that's the guy that's going to stand up to Tepper. I'm going, well, then why didn't he stand up to Fitterer? There's a clip right now going around on social media. You can find it yourself of the Panthers war room when they drafted DJ Johnson. Mm-hmm. That clip, that pick is one of the big problems with the organization. They traded multiple picks to move up to draft a guy, which means they put more resources into a guy, and he didn't pan out. Barely played this year at all. And in that clip, you have Tepper, and you have Fitterer, and you have Reich, right? The triumvirate that was making the biggest decisions for the franchise, saying DJ Johnson's our guy. And Tepper's going like, are we convicted? And they're going, yes, we're convicted. And then right at the end, they panned to Dan Morgan, and he just goes, good player, let's go. There's two options here, right? Because some believed he had his phone. If you watch the clip, he had his phone out, and then when they started saying, let's do DJ Johnson, let's do it, he kind of looked like he was like, all right, I'll hang up. Like he had something else he wanted to do. There's two options there. Either one, he agreed with them. He thought DJ Johnson was a good player, let's go. Or two, in his heart of hearts, he knew he wasn't, and he did not stand on the table and say, absolutely not, which is what you would want your guy to do in that situation. You'd want him to say, listen, you guys are the power brokers. I disagree with it. You want to go with it? Once he gets here, I'm going to be all in and helping him develop. I don't think he's the right guy. And you may say, that's crazy. Why would you do that? Why would you disagree with your boss? Well, if you're the passion, if you're the intensity, if you're the I won't take no BS from nobody, that's what you do. That's what you do. What if Tepper tells you, hey, DJ Johnson's our guy this upcoming draft? Now suddenly you're going to be like, oh, I'm comfortable disagreeing with you now. Mm-hmm. I just think it was necessary to get a full refresh. Necessary. I don't know if there's an organization that's probably wrong. I was going to say I don't know if there's an organization in sports that is more in need of a refresh, but I can think of some in other sports that are absolutely in need of a refresh. You could say Washington's in the middle of the most needed refresh in sports. I'm fine with that. But gosh, I know the Panthers are up there. They're top 5 or 6 as far as in need of a full refresh. And it's not a full refresh when you're going down the hall to make the hire. That's the problem right there. I'm going to be rooting for it. We're going to cover the Panthers regardless. And I'll tell you this right now. Way more fun for me if they're winning games. I'm rooting for Dan Morgan. It's just I don't have confidence right now in less with Dan Morgan and more in the setup and in the situation and how he got to where he is. I disagree with the process.
I even told Chris Lee on Panthers Playbook yesterday, you know what? If Dan Morgan succeeds and if he wants to keep this receipt and shove it in my face, by all means, he's more than welcome to do so.
I'll celebrate it with him.
Yeah. Hey, you know what?
And whether he does or not, like, hey, if we're ever in the same bar, next beer's on me. Because I don't think he's put in a fair situation. I think it's the process that arrived at Dan Morgan that is flawed, more so than Dan Morgan. And I don't expect him to say, like, oh, hey, one of 32 of my dream jobs? No, thank you. I don't like. I expect him. He's doing nothing wrong in this situation. Oh. It's the process that got to him that was wrong.